السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. And welcome to another video on the Islamic Knowledge YouTube channel. And before we go any further, if I can ask you to hit that subscribe button so that it allows our channel to grow, inshallah. And now in today's video, we're looking at an incredible book titled Nukat Tarifah في التحدث عن ردود ابن أبي شيبة على أبي حنيفة rahimahullah ta'ala. And this has been written by Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari rahimahullah, and it's with the research and footnotes of Dr. Hamza al-Bakri, which are just absolutely phenomenal, by the way. Now the book has been printed by Darul Fath, and it is about 750 pages of solid reading, you could say. It ends at about page 750, and then you've got the contents page. You can see the quality of the paper is absolutely brilliant. It's a really nice hardback copy. It is quite thick. It's a bit of a heavy book, but it is a fantastic book. Now, as you can see, I have got my notes as well at the start of the book, and I will be sharing a PDF, by the way, of these notes on the Islamic Knowledge Telegram channel. So just go on Telegram, type in @IK courses, and join the Telegram channels that you can see, and you can get a copy of these beneficial notes that you can find in this book. So what's this book all about? Essentially, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba rahimahullah was a very early muhaddith who passed away in 235 Hijri, and he's got a chapter in his book titled Kitab al-Radd ala Abi Hanifa. So Ibn Abi Shayba has got a book called Musannaf. It's famously known as Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba. So in this book, he's got a chapter called Kitab al-Radd ala Abi Hanifa, in which he gathered ahadith on about 125 masail which contradict Abu Hanifa's position. So for each of these 125 masail, so let's just have a look randomly. For example, let's just pick, if you can see here, mas'ala 3. He's looking at each of the masail one by one, and in each mas'ala, what Ibn Abi Shayba will do is that he will present certain ahadith which totally contradict the position of Abu Hanifa. So if you have a look here, for example, Ibn Abi Shayba rahimahullah says, حدثنا Ibn Numayr. He presents all the ahadith, and then he says, وَذُكِرَ أَنَّ أَبَا حَنِيفَ قَالَ سَهْمٌ لِلْفَرَسِ وَسَهْمٌ لِصَاحِبِهِ. So you can see he's presenting the ahadith that contradict the position of Abu Hanifa, and then he'll say, وَذُكِرَ أَنَّ أَبَا حَنِيفَ قَالَ. And he's done this for about 125 masail, and for each of these masail, he's done this exact same procedure, wherein he brings ahadith, and then he says, he just mentions the view of Abu Hanifa. He doesn't attack Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, to be fair, and he just shows how Abu Hanifa is contradicting ahadith. Now, numerous scholars wrote counter refutations on Ibn Abi Shayba, showing Abu Hanifa's reasonings behind his positions, and that he's not actually contradicting the ahadith, and they're all trying to show that basically Abu Hanifa rahimahullah has been misunderstood by Ibn Abi Shayba, and that his understanding of the ahadith is slightly different, or that he has other ahadith that support his position. And at times you will notice that Ibn Abi Shayba has totally misunderstood the position of Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. Now, amongst the scholars who wrote a refutation on Ibn Abi Shayba was a scholar by the name of Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari. He wrote this book, Nukat Tarifah في التحدث عن ردود ابن أبي شيبة على أبي حنيفة. And on the cover of the first print of the book, Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari rahimahullah actually wrote these words on the first print of the book, and therefore Shaykh Hamza Bakri, when he printed the book, he actually put these words on the front cover. He writes, ادعى ابن أبي شيبة مخالفة أبي حنيفة لأحاديث صحيحة في 125 مسألة من أمهات المسائل، فقام هذا الكتاب بتمحيص أدلة الطرفين، وكشف عن كثير من الحقائق في اختلاف مدارك الفقهاء وأطوار الفقه الإسلامي مما له خطره عند الباحثين. So this book is perfect in trying to understand the madarik of the fuqaha, i.e. the various ways in which the fuqaha may understand the ahadith or Quranic verses, and how they can differ in their understanding. Now, the book begins with a wonderful 53-page introduction by Shaykh Hamza Bakri, who speaks about various interesting topics, by the way. And for example, Shaykh Hamza Bakri, being someone who actually loves Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari rahimahullah a lot, he's got a section on page 36 wherein he speaks about the accusation that Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari was a muta'assib Hanafi, and then he has al-jawab an shubhati ta'assub al-Kawthari, when he speaks about this accusation, and he tries to respond to this. Then on page 49, he expresses how al-Kawthari treats his opponents differently depending on how they have treated the scholars. So he's kind of like a tit for tat type of scholar. If you've laid ad hominem attacks on Abu Hanifa, al-Kawthari rahimahullah will kind of lay a bit of ad hominem attacks on you. Now, I'm not saying that approach is correct or it's appropriate, but that's just the way Kawthari rahimahullah works. And therefore, because Ibn Abi Shayba rahimahullah never really attacked Abu Hanifa personally, you'll notice that al-Kawthari rahimahullah completely avoids ad hominem attacks on Ibn Abi Shayba. So, for example, Shaykh Hamza Bakri he writes وقد تجلى هذا المنهج الذي سلكه الكوثري في كتابي الكوثري تأنيب الخطيب والنكت الطريفة، حيث سلك في الأول مسلك القسوة على الخطيب والشدة في خطابه، بينما سلك في الثاني مسلك اللين مع ابن أبي شيبة واللطف في عتابه. وهكذا ترى هذا المنهج ظاهرا في سائر كتبه ومقالاته. فإذا لاحظت مسألة اشتد في عبارته فيها ورأيت أنه كان يمكنه أن يعبر بألين منها وأن الأمر يتم دون هذه الشدة، فليحمل ذلك على اختلاف وجهة نظرك مع وجهة نظره في استحقاق الأمر هذه الشدة أو عدم استحقاقها، لا على التعصب والإنصاف، وفرق كبير بين الأمرين فتأن ولا تتعجل. And now another common thing we see is how Kawthari and Dr. Hamza have benefited tremendously, by the way, in this book from Faydul Bari of Shaykh Anwar Shah Kashmir rahimahullah. So on page 252, and he's going through all of the masail, by the way, that Ibn Abi Shayba has claimed that the ahadith on this topic contradict Abu Hanifa. You can see here Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari rahimahullah, he writes, and he's speaking about he says here in the footnotes, وَفِي فَيْضِ الْبَارِ إِفَاضَةٌ فِي تَحْقِيقِ الْمَسْأَلَةِ عَلَى مَنْحٍ آخَرٍ. Then even on page 188, Shaykh Zahid rahimahullah, he writes here, he says, and he's speaking about it, وبهذا ظهر أنه لا غبار على قول أبي حنيفة في المسألة وأنه لم ينفرد به بل معه أئمة ومن أراد المزيد فعليه بمعاني الآثار وعمدة القاري وفيض الباري. He'll constantly make reference to it as well. He says on page 410, I mean, I could come up with loads and loads of examples of this, but for example on page 410 he says وقد أطال مولانا محمد أنور شاه كشميري في فيض الباري النفس في تحقيق هذه المسألة على مذاقه الخاص بما يفيد الاطلاع عليه فوائد جليلة وأوضح البدر العيني المسألة أيضا بما يكفي ويشفي. And he continues like this, and it's just more or less everywhere where he just emphasizes how important the writings of Al-Kashmiri rahimahullah are for Hanafis. And then when it comes to Dr. Hamza al-Bakri as well, he regularly just brings massive full chunks from Faydul Bari in the footnotes. So if we look on page 266, you can see he's bringing a full section here, ويرى الإمام الكشميري رحمه الله في فيض الباري. Then on page 263 as well, you've got a full section more or less coming from قال الإمام الكشميري في فيض الباري, and more or less all of this is from him. Other places as well, I mean, you just need to turn a few pages, and in the footnotes you'll see Shaykh Hamza bringing huge chunks, literally. I think this was another one here on page 255, قال الإمام الكشميري في فيض الباري, constantly ثم قال الكشميري وأما ما رواه. So it's really he's benefited both of these scholars, the author and the one who's writing the footnotes. Shaykh Hamza Bakri are really benefiting from Shaykh Anwar Shah Kashmir rahimahullah's Faydul Bari. In fact, on page 524, Al-Kawthari, interestingly, he actually even quotes Shaykh Ashraf Ali al-Thanawi rahimahullah as well, which is quite interesting. It's not something you see him do all the time. In his maqalat, he does praise him as well. But he says, يقال الألامة محمد أشرف علي التهانوي رحمه الله المسح الجوربين بخبر الآحاد وغسل الرجلين قطعي فلا يكون المسح بدلا عنه إلا إذا كان الجورب في معنى الخف الثابت مسحه بالتواتر. In any case, it just shows how there are different scholars that they're all benefiting from their contemporaries as well. Now, in terms of other fawaid in the book, we've got a golden comment from Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari rahimahullah on page 173, which I just found really beneficial. And the way he writes and he explains this topic is just fantastic. He says on page 173, just to get there on that page, he says, أقول مدارك أئمة الاجتهاد المعترف بإمامتهم في الفقه أدق وأوسع وهم لا يحكمون في مسألة إلا بعد استيفاء جميع ما ورد فيها من موصول ومقطوع وموقوف ومرسل وعمل متوارث مع استذكار القواعد العامة في الفقه وهم أقرب إلى عهد المصطفى صلى الله عليه وسلم من مدون الأصول الستة فلا يفوتهم شيء من ملابسات تلك الروايات. This is a very important comment. Then he says on page 246 another comment which I found really beneficial, which is where he's speaking about when Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik come together on a mas'ala. It's a very strong opinion. أقول يريد التحدث عن خيار المجلس المشهور المختلف فيه بين الفقهاء لكن شيخ فقهاء العراق أبا حنيفة وشيخ فقهاء المدينة مالكا رضي الله عنهما على اتفاق في المسألة وقلما تجد أنهما على اتفاق في مسألة إلا وتكون قوة الدليل ووضوح الحجة في جانبهما. That's a really interesting point. Then on page 737 you have an absolutely amazing section when Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari, and he does this in another book of his as well, Fiqh Ahl al-Iraq. Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari, he goes through all of the usul and principles of Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, and he makes a very interesting point about the qawa'id amma that Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik, to be fair, rely upon, in which he says that these qawa'id are actually qat'i, and a few scholars like Al-Qarafi and Al-Shatibi have mentioned the same point as well. So let's just go through what he says. He says قد تبين مما بسطناه في تحقيق أدلة أبي حنيفة في تلك المسائل أن أبا حنيفة كان يأخذ بأخبار الأحاد الصحيحة المستجمعة لشروط الصحة المعتبرة عنده في بيان مجمل الكتاب والسنة، وفيما لا معارض له أقوى كعمومات الكتاب أو ظواهره أو الخبر الصحيح المحتف بالقرائن أو الخبر المشهور بالمتواتر، وعند وجود معارض كهذه يأخذ بالمعارض الأقوى عملا بأقوى الدليلين، فيؤول الخبر الآخر بوجوه تأويل تظهر له مما يستغسغه أهل الفقه في الدين، ويحتم الأخذ بما يبرئ الذمة بيقين عند اختلاف الروايات. He carries on, and this is the one that I really enjoyed, where he says ويعتمد على القواعد العامة في ترجيح أحد الاحتمالين أو الدليلين على الآخر باعتبار أن القواعد العامة يقينية في الشرع، وخبر الآحاد الذي له معارض في أدنى درجات الظن. Now, just before all of this, just to go back to the start of the book as well, Shaykh Hamza Bakri, he speaks on page 29 about 4 key principles that Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari is trying to get across in this book, which is number 1, التسامح في الاختلاف الفقهي. He then says, number 2, صحة الحديث لا تقتضي بالضرورة العمل به. That's number 2. Then number 3, ضرورة جمع روايات الحديث كلها والنظر في ألفاظه قبل الاستدلال به، and then number 4, مراعاة العمل المتوارث للأمة في الاجتهاد. Now, what's the reason why Kawthari wrote this book? I mean, we know he wrote Ta'nib al-Khatib. So basically what happened is that Shaykh Muhammad Hamid al-Faqih published just the biography of Abu Hanifa from Tarikh Baghdad. That's what prompted al-Kawthari to write Ta'nib al-Khatib. So what prompted him to write this book here? What happened was that there was a scholar by the name of Taqiyuddin al-Hilali, and what he did was that he published just this chapter, i.e. Kitab al-Raddi ala Abi Hanifa, from Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba, just that part. And that's what prompted al-Kawthari to actually write this book. So in Ta'nib al-Khatib, he's responding to the actions of Shaykh Muhammad Hamid al-Faqih, and in this book, he's responding to the actions of Shaykh Taqiyuddin al-Hilali. And in fact, after writing a Nukat al-Tarifah, interestingly, Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari actually met Shaykh Taqiyuddin al-Hilali, and the scholar was actually not aware that this is al-Kawthari that he's talking to. So as he's talking to al-Kawthari, he actually tells al-Kawthari that, you know what, I've heard you're a really talented scholar and that you defend hadith, etc. And I thought that, you know, you're really a talented scholar, etc. So then Kawthari says that I started thinking to myself, shall I tell him that I am the one who wrote that book? So he says وأفاض في هذا المعنى بحرارة وتحمس وأنا ساكت فترددت لحظة هل أتركه على حسن ظنه بهذا العاجز. Shall I let him think good of me and I won't tell him that, you know what, I totally disagree with your approach, you're attacking Imam, etc. أم أصارحه برأيي فيما يقول وأشوش خاطر هذا الزائر فرأيت الأول غشا يأباه المسلم والثاني نصحا والدين النصيحة فقلت يا أستاذ أراك تفرط في رمي توائف السنة بالإعراض عن الحديث وليس بينهم طائفة. So Shaykh Taqiyuddin al-Hilali was actually praising him, and Kawthari kind of made the conversation a bit uncomfortable, as he usually likes to do in some of his books, mashallah. But in any case, they had a huge debate over the Raf'ul Yadayn issue and a few other ones. But then he actually tells him at the end that, look, Shaykh Taqiyuddin al-Hilali actually tells him, كنت أنا الساعي في طبع كتاب ابن أبي شيبة في الهند. I am the one who published that Kitab al-Raddi ala Abi Hanifa. So then Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari says to him, why didn't you just print the full book? لو سعيت في طبع المصنف بأكمله بدل طبع باب منه لغاية خاصة لكنت عملا يذكر. If you had printed the whole book, that would have been very good. But in any case, the book is actually, like I said, completely filled with fawaid. Shaykh Hamza Bakri as well, another unique feature, by the way, is that he benefits a lot from Shaykh Muhammad Awama's footnotes upon Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba, and he adds loads of those fawaid in there. At times you'll even see him refuting Shaykh Abdul Rahman ibn Yahya al-Muallimi. So for example, on page 118, he's got a section where he's refuting some discussion from Shaykh. He says here, قلت ويؤيده ما ذكره الكشميري. He says أما قول الأستاذ المعلمي في التنكيل أن حمل الكلام على إشعار مخصوص دعوة. He carries on, and you know, you can see constantly refutations as well on Shaykh Abdul Rahman ibn Yahya al-Muallimi. Of course, we know that they had their back and forth, Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari and his followers, between him and Shaykh Abdul Rahman ibn Yahya al-Muallimi, and obviously Shaykh Hamza Bakri is clearly part of the group of Shaykh زاهد الكوثري. Here as well, page 466, أقر الأستاذ المعلم في التنكيل بأن هذا الفهم للحديث وسماه تأويلا له مساغ إذا كان لفظ طلب. He carries on and he's basically refuting him there. Another unique and beneficial point is found on page 382, where Shaykh Hamza Bakri says that Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda actually says أنه كان يقول معظم ما ينقله الأستاذ الكوثري في كتبه من حفظه. This is incredible. If this is true, this would actually determine that Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari had a tremendous memory. I don't believe that statement should be taken too literally, because I don't think that's possible looking at how crazy this book is in terms of references, but it does definitively speak about the incredible memory that he did have. And there are so many other beneficial points. For example, on page 65, there's a beneficial point from Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari rahimahullah, where he explains that the first caliphate to actually adopt a madhab, it adopted the Hanafi madhab, which was the Abbasids, and the last caliphate to adopt a madhab was the Ottomans, and they also adopted the Hanafi madhab. So he says حتى إن نرى مذهبه رغم رغبته أول المذاهب الفقهية في الإسلام في الحكم به في محاكم الإسلام مع استمرار العمل به في أغلب الأقطار مدى القرون إلى أن أصبح آخر المذاهب انسحابا من المحاكم عند تغلغل آراء الغرب في نفوس المغرورين بها من أبناء الشرق الإسلامي ولله الأمر من قبل ومن بعد. Then another beneficial point on page 111, when he's discussing how the principles of Abu Hanifa rahimahullah are such that he prefers to make a Muslim as much as possible become free instead of being a slave. So he says ومن أصل أبي حنيفة أنه إذا دار الدليل بين إبقاء النسمة تحت الرق وإنقاذها منه يميل إلى الإنقاذ بدون إلغاء تصرفات المالك العاقل والله جل شأنه ولي التوفيق. So in any case, beautiful fawaid, random fawaid all throughout the book, and you can see some of them inshallah in these notes as well, which I will put the PDF on the Telegram group. And this is a book which every Hanafi should read. It is one of the best books that he did write, Shaykh Zahid al-Kawthari. Again, we may not agree with his approach on everything, some of the things are a bit harsh, etc., but it's a very, very beneficial book, and no Hanafi should go without reading this book. I hope you benefited from this video. I do hope you purchase the book as well. I'll try to get the link to purchase the book. Do share this with this video with others who may also benefit, and I hope to see you on the next video. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.